and TV shows, we're gearing up for a series of star-studded ceremonies. We have a whole glut of traditions to jump into, which would include, but is not limited to, snubs, sweeps, selective exclusion, impassioned jabs at the industry, unimpassioned justifications for votes, rigs, bribery, accidental buyouts. We have it all, folks. We truly have it all. It's evident that our major award shows tend to sideline animation in some way or form. Whether in service to other mediums or not, there's typically some oversight in how animated works are treated during this time of year. It's become a tradition to scope out voter comments on Best Animated Feature, because there's always some ignorant tripe there explaining why they gave Disney sequel number 65 the cosign. There's a general air of mistrust and cynicism around it all. That's not to say there aren't moments we can't rally behind, but those happen once in a lifetime. We know the drill and are generally prepared to see some bullshit go down. It's no big deal at this point. Many people tend to write off the awards altogether due to the widespread nature of these fumbles. Even the Annie Awards, the show created specifically to honor the medium of animation, has fucked up in years previous, so there's not much hope that anyone else will be able to keep it classy. I can't say I indulge in most of the ceremonies myself, but surely there is a little more merit to the award than it feels. You got every reason in the world to be jaded and skeptical of the whole production, but the prizes themselves probably do lend each work an important distinction. They're not the end-all be-all, of course, but when a good product gets its flowers, it does send a message. Not all awards were created equal, which makes it all the more rewarding when some shit really pops off. Part of the problem is just not knowing where to look. There are plenty of awards that consider animation within their nominations process, but there's only a few that can hone in on it. I wanted to see how well each of the major awards handles it, and to see if there can be a shortlisted definitive cartoon codifying honors. I rounded up about a dozen shows or categories and combed through their histories to see how they stack up. From worst to best, we're going to dive into the respective relationships to animation, what their share of awarded projects looks like, and what their general impact on the work is.
Here we go, we gotta rock, easy go, now we go,
So I left this in purely as a dummy choice on the off chance that the other choices were just so bad that we had to have some at the bottom to keep everything level. That didn't turn out to be the case, but we should take the time to cover it seriously anyway. For the uninitiated, the Kids' Choice Awards is an award show produced by Nickelodeon. Originally coined as the Big Ballot in 1987, the original show was a natural extension of the channel's dedication to its young demographics. If you watched a couple when you were a kid, you probably had a good time. It really became about the raw spectacle by the late 90s. If you're an animation fan on top of that, your feelings are probably a bit more mixed. The main awards presented that cater to animation in specific would be Favorite Cartoon, coined in 1995, and Favorite Animated Movie, coined in 2005. The latter mostly sticks to the average everyday picks from 4 or 5 of the same studios you've seen time and time again, nothing too special, no auteur choices to be found. Favorite Cartoon isn't too different, but it has gained significant infamy over the years. In the beginning, its slot mainly commemorated the most popular mainstream TV cartoons at the time. The nominations were fairly well-rounded in that regard, but the award usually went to a Nicktoon of varying popularity. If you can even believe this, the first award actually went to Doug, of all things. I mean, not unpopular, but probably the most unpopular of the original 3. The next few years were populated with wins by Rugrats, and after an upset win by The Simpsons in 2002, the category would be eclipsed, swept, absolutely decimated by a particularly yellow shadow. From 2003 to 2007 and then 2009 onward, SpongeBob SquarePants has taken the crown for favorite cartoon every single time. It's not an exaggeration, that is over 20 wins, almost entirely consecutive. This year's show would award him his 21st blimp in the category, leaving the series with several dozen overall. Since the early 2010s, its reputation as a repeat award winner has achieved mimetic status. Even against series who have achieved sudden popularity in brief periods of time, Nickelodeon's literal golden child always managed to squeak by with another win under its belt. The only instance where he had been bested was the year Avatar: The Last Airbender was set to wrap. I don't think anyone would blame you for walking away a bit salty, but to play devil's advocate for a moment, the award has always been a bit of a popularity contest. Whichever cartoon is most popular with kids is supposed to win. There have definitely been serious favorites crop up since its premiere, but I have yet to see any cartoon since SpongeBob reach a similar level of recognition and target that audience so consistently. In some way, you could see how something like The Simpsons or even Rugrats might not fit the bill. There was a period of time where everyone wanted their own SpongeBob. One of the nominees was having its growth monitored by executives in comparison to SpongeBob just to see how far they would get. Though several of these series were fresher and had more goodwill than SpongeBob at certain points, they have not achieved its colossal amount of clout. Even dummy picks like Scooby-Doo or Tom and Jerry were kinda out before they were in. It's not an especially helpful award to gauge shifting trends, but it's more accurate than what we've been saying the whole time. Not super accurate to how we voted as kids, I assume, but accurate enough that it could be vindicated. In the old days, it brought us together for stakes, stunts, and plenty of slime. And in current year, it unites people from all over again to shit on this small, independent award show. Could make me cry.
You can play producer! Producer? What's that?
The way this show's categories are set up don't make it more than a minor footnote, but we're gonna talk about it anyway. The Producers Guild of America Award was created in 1990 for obvious reasons. Only 2 categories have traditionally acknowledged the existence of animation, that being the award for Animated Motion Picture from 2005 and Outstanding Children's Programming from 2011. The latter has nominated quite a few cartoons, but it's usually for shows that were already doing pretty well. Every year, Sesame Street has swept through a shortlist filled with 6 to 11 content, except for 2021 where Muppets Haunted Mansion won. Such variety. The other one follows suit by having a winner's circle comprised mainly of Disney and Pixar films. The 4 sole winners that aren't Mouse House affiliates were Curse of the Were-Rabbit for 2005, Tintin for 2011, The Lego Movie for 2014, and Spider-Verse for 2018. Pretty unimpressive all around.
And the woman who has inspired me every day for the past 25 years, the cute one from the Bengals. See you at the cool party.
Being first presented in 1944, the Golden Globe Awards were a product of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. The organization, having been created the year prior, was invested in bettering the distribution of news related to U.S. film to outside territories. Presumably to bring some sort of synergy to both sides of the aisle, the award was meant to honor works from the United States and the international scene. The HFPA has a history marred with scandal and intrigue. As early as 1958, there were possible signs that sus shit was going on amidst their ranks. Allegations of grand bribery and racial discrimination were among the most well-known, with a 2021 Variety expose revealing the lack of diversity within an international group of journos. The size of the voting members block is also cause for concern here. The BAFTAs, which we'll get to later, has about 6,000. The Academy has 9,000. The Emmys has about 20,000. The HFPA's most recent figure was 105. 105, that's it. That's all they have. The most recent award added was Best Animated Feature Film from 2007. The convoluted rule set used for Best Motion Picture categories have typically excluded some animated films that may have had a decent shot at a nomination. Likely due to the time period it was initiated, most of its nominations and wins have gone to Pixar, with DreamWorks, Laika, Illumination, and Disney Feature all lagging far behind. Most wins for each year seem to sync up with whatever the popular consensus was. Not too groundbreaking, but the HFPA is America-centric by default.
I've seen this one 1,000 times. It won a Humanitas.
What's that?
An award for TV shows that don't use words like retarded.
That's retarded. And queer.
The Humanitas is a designation dedicated to acknowledging the film and TV that promote human dignity, meaning, and freedom. They didn't officially recognize animation as its own category until 1986, but they usually go against the grain when they bother to include them. See, the interpretation of its nominee criteria mainly highlights the very special episodes of the season. Works that seem to highlight the human experience are the best of the most dramatic genre in all of media. For animation, that typically translates to looking at shows for younger demographics. Preschool storytelling as we know it now wasn't really a thing back in the 80s, so it meant a lot of covert anti-drug allegories and one-offs about bullying. There's a few intriguing nominations, but the glut of episodes that earn them fall into the same few categories, and their presentation isn't too different between them. Surprisingly, despite the wider selection of content to choose from, it started leaving the animation category out in certain years. 2010, 2011, 2014, 2015, and 2019 all lack the award, often alongside the inclusion of a children's live-action one left intact. More recently, their nominees commonly stem from the 2 to 5 set. It serves as an interesting time capsule for the state of animation writing in the old days, but otherwise, you wouldn't get much out of it other than some secondary appreciation for Life with Louie. It's a pretty good sitcom, I'm not gonna knock him for that.
Oh, this is the greatest cat ever! Oh, come on, Mom, please.
Oh no, cats lick the butter.
What?
Oh yeah, they jump on the counter, they lick the butter, you eat that butter.
I tell you, every year I recognize fewer and fewer names.
This one wasn't exactly a dummy choice like the Kids' Choice Awards, but it wasn't high up on my hit list either. It's not even hit a quarter centennial yet. This show is on par in age with my age bracket, but they only started to acknowledge the cartoons in 2006 with a slate of mostly TV-14 picks. Most of the time, Family Guy and The Simpsons are duking it out for attention, except in 2009 when SpongeBob took gold, and in 2018, More Miraculous of all things took the W. I will say that the nominations for the 2010s have been interesting. It does speak to the shift in TV cartoons at the time, that a category usually dominated by Fox comedies are now being pushed by Gravity Falls and Over the Garden Wall.
So Jane, what is BAFTA?
That's such an interesting question.
So typically, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has a stranglehold on the dearth of award show discussion, and by proxy, discourse as well. They don't have a direct equivalent in terms of raw influence, but across the pond, we do have a more equalized sounding board for the same parts in media. The British Academy of Film and Television Arts was founded in 1947, with its proper award show following in 1949. The American Academy is technically a trade organization, while the British one is a charity. Most of them exist to promote film and TV, but in different capacities. The US one was originally created as a way for studio heads to avoid union arbitration and possibly give the industry some clout. The British one, founded not too long after World War II ended, was thought to be a chance to restructure the local entertainment scene while also propping up the cream of the crop. Both of them got their award shows started 2 years after their creation and have been thriving ever since. While the Oscars is the most prolific award that exclusively promotes film, the BAFTAs are split up between several mediums. The main one saw its first spin-off in 1955 with the British Academy Television Awards. Children's categories, originally presented in the original two, spun off into its own show in 1996. Games media got its own a decade later. Even student films got its own ceremony starting in 2017. For our purposes, we're going to focus on the main show and the children's offshoot. There's only 2 awards left for the main show, Best Animated Film and Best Animated Short. The children's show covers a lot of ground. Animation has separate awards in the general and preschool designations, but there's a lot of crossover to be found in technicals. International short form and feature film is typically dominated by cartoons. Some of the discontinued awards are also led by animated works and their crew members. In a broad sense, I found a fair amount of variety within this strand. I mean, with so many options to choose from, even if we just stick to the homeland, it would be difficult to not shake things up at some point. More homogeneous categories are a side effect of them being instituted later than they should have been. It's more common that more recent editions harbor some true popularity votes, but I was amused by some of the winners I came across. Not the most exciting show by way of competitors, but the potential clout lent through the BAFTA name is significant to those who are lent a nomination.
To present the award for Outstanding Reality Composition Program, here are Rick and Morty.
So, to help form an even dozen awards for me to look at, I decided to split the Emmy Awards into 2 parts. With the rise of cable television, the designation feels more than a bit arbitrary, but these 2 ceremonies are separate for a reason. They've got different histories and represent different shifts in time. To simplify, the primetime show is the one with more eyes on it and have been around longer. Thus, it's considered the main category to talk about within animation circles. Officially christened by the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the first version of the Emmy Awards was first broadcast in 1949, about 3 years after the former's creation. Its backstory and logic behind its existence is arguably identical to that of the Oscars. As of today, there are 3 classifications of Emmy. There's the Engineering Emmy, which honors technical and mechanical aspects of productions. There's the Creative Arts Emmy, which honors various roles on the production side in the vein of editing, sound design, you name it. And the Original Strand, which is a generalist one that kind of addresses both, but also not really. These 3 classes are presented by both editions of the Emmys, and I don't think either one leans closer towards any given category. From prime time, a group of awards you most likely be familiar with are Outstanding Short Form, Individual Achievement, and Animated Program, typically half hour. Loosely speaking, I arranged them in order of ascending variation in nominations based on genre, network, etc., etc. Outstanding Short Form 15-minute series was surprisingly homogenous. You'd struggle to find nominees that didn't stem from the old age Big 3 kids networks. I think the only winners that don't belong to any of them were Love, Death, and Robot, just 3 times over. Boring. Individual achievement has to be a bit more varied just by nature of the award itself. Up to 9 awardees may become winners in any given year, and between them, there's not too many curveballs thrown in. Every blue moon there's a winner from an unexpected source, but it's the unsung heroes from the most obvious sources that get the most shine. Go figure. Animated program is the people's category, the only one the common man may stay invested in for years to come. Until 2008, this was the main category for any traditional animated series or specials up to an hour in length. More commonly, before the turn of the century, a winner over an hour stands as a lone competitor in its own subcategory. For any nominee to be considered victorious, they have to accrue at least 50% of the vote, so in years like 98 or 92, there is a lone ranger with a sole credit. Each decade of Outstanding Animated Program helps tell an evolving story of TV animation. The 80s is occupied by TV specials, the 90s is a trade-off between cable Saturday morning slate and broadcast TV, and the next 2 decades detail adult animation's quick rise to power. The latter still has a tight grip on the category to this day, though occasionally a program for the 6 to 11 set manages to squeeze its way into that spot. Similar to its primetime counterpart, several of the daytime categories can easily reflect the evolution in TV animation, albeit to a lesser degree. Outstanding Animated Program pretty much represents a different set of trends for each decade, complete with the occasional fringe favorite. Peep the Beetlejuice sneak in between winning episodes of Pooh. In contrast, the award for Outstanding Performer has impressed me the most by being the most varied and willing to highlight lesser recognized artists. From 2022 onward, various categories that would normally occupy the previous show space would be incorporated into a new offshoot titled the Children's and Family Emmy Award. At some point, I considered spinning off the Children's and Family Emmys into its own section, but there's not much to talk about because it was literally brought into existence 2 years ago. I only thought to stick it in the daytime part because they cover similar areas, like they murked 90% of daytime stuff, so it makes sense. Against my own predictions, the inaugural ceremony honored a near equal mix of animated, live action, and hybrid projects, even if they're mostly coming from the same few producers.
And the Oscar goes to Green Book.
Okay, so you're gonna have to trust me on this one. The placement might be a bit strange, but I will get into my reasoning. The Oscars are easily the lightning rod of this entire discourse. As a consequence of being the most visible and most prolific award show out there, its history and practices are held to a higher standard than whatever its contemporaries might be. In theory, it has the most potential to move the needle by implementing internal changes. The Academy has access to a vast brain trust of individuals, of which a significant portion could likely elevate the medium under the right circumstances. But before we even get into interventional methods, we have to establish the lore. The Oscars were created to control the flow of power between the 5 main branches of American film talent. First held in 1929 by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the accolade was created by a movie-making megaboss to union bust and shore up support for an arguably even more controversial pre-Depression era industry. Ironically, its shift away from such activities began promptly after a failed push to coerce stars to take voluntary pay cut during the crisis. Over time, the Academy has bolstered its prominence with the heap of numerous offshoots from the original ceremony. Impasse is also responsible for presenting the Governor's Award since 2009, the Scientific and Technical Award since 1931, the Student Academy Award since 1973, and the Nichols Fellowship in Screenwriting since '86. Okay, not an award, but they're often credited with founding different institutions, such as the Margaret Herrick Library, the Pickford Center of Motion Picture Study, the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, and the School of Cinematic Arts at USC. In recent years, the organization's revenue hovers just under $150 million. It contextualizes a few things. Predictably, one of the country's most prominent white boys club to exist institutionally has received scores of criticism for being out of sync with the general public culturally, emotionally, and demographically. Length of time discussions around phenomena like Oscar bait media and the Oscars so white hashtag have persisted in inverse proportion to how long said issues have been there. This curiously mirrors the length and legacy of animation's inclusion in the awards. The two categories wholly dedicated to honoring animation would be the Best Animated Short, christened in 1932, and Best Animated Feature, christened in 2002. One is largely homogeneous and is mostly a popularity contest, and the other put a lot of respect on Canada's name before there was even discourse. Years of Cartoon Brew collating different ballot submissions from members and the reasons for voting for Disney Pixar joint number 18.7 has eroded a lot of trust between fans, audience members, and the Academy. If there's no hard contempt there, at the very least there is a sense of superiority built in as a result of standing next to a goofy-looking cartoon at an award show. I think the ambivalence towards animated film is more forced obliviousness and less malicious intent. You gotta picture this less as a war against gods and more as that one kid in your class that just doesn't happen to notice you. Like, I know it gets on your nerves, but stop it. Like, you're acting stupid right now. Stop. You don't need their validation, I promise. I think the vitriol towards the award itself is more frustration with the state of things. There's been a huge push by animation professionals to be recognized through this forum, and I have to imagine that they were successful to some extent. And the prestige is genuinely worth more than we can imagine at points. Beauty and the Beast and Toy Story are the reason we could even wrench some sort of half apology out of them that one year anyway.
Is it really wasting time to say that animation is the very definition of film, artfully telling sophisticated... Thank you. You know what? See that? Yeah. Artfully. Thank you, guys.
This is barely anything. I don't understand why I'll clap so hard. The pattern of industry-wide vent sessions following up the conclusion of each Oscar ceremony is kind of funny, and it led to a whole other phenomenon that I do want to try and get to before the year is out. It's definitely not unwarranted, but I think looking at the bigger picture of how it's set up and where we're at as an industry, you could do worse than the Oscars. Objectively, you could do a lot worse. Like, to be entirely fair, I think the audience does demand a lot of familiar faces to grab the spotlight once again. Their choices aren't entirely homogenous, but you really gotta ask yourself, like, if this boardroom of old crusty white dudes is the only thing holding Anomalisa back from winning an Oscar. Really think about it for a moment. I think it is helpful to have a finger on the pulse of what certain voters believe, even if their words ultimately chalk up to not thinking much of anything about animation in the present. And honestly, I also think that the discourse does downplay a fair amount of credit that's due just based on the wide audience that the show itself brings in. By pure osmosis, you could come out of it being more knowledgeable about animation. In the same way that prestige manifests in non-verbal ways, the benefits of standing toe-to-toe next to some of film's greats, even as just a lowly nominee, can also be communicated without words. Is it not completely insane to you that Best Animated Short just does not get discussed? Like, it gets swerved in most of these discussions? Because that's where most of the variance happens. Absolutely, the Oscars could do better as is. There have been some signs that show they've been improving, but it's like nobody even gives credence to the fact that, like, for half the history of this category, it's been folks other than Disney cleaning it up over there. I think it incidentally became a figurehead for just the general disrespect that award shows might dole out. Not to say that it has not been disrespectful in its own right, it definitely has. But I also think there's a fair amount of credit that's been washed away as a result of this ongoing discussion. And I think we need to recenter and re-emphasize how much an Oscar can truly move mountains for somebody.
The nominees for what just happened? I'm sorry. Guide me through this.
Aifa has a long, storied history in international affairs, but the Hollywood branch has also managed to turn the tide a bit. For 50 years, the primary award known to honor animation has been presenting categories in North America with almost a similar amount of prestige as the Oscars within animation circles. Despite its prestige and intertwined history with animation itself, some would hold its reputation in skepticism. Starting from the beginning, the idea for the award show itself came from acclaimed voice actress June Foray sometime in the early 70s. When broached with the then president of Aifa Hollywood, a ceremony was put together that fall. Over the years, the show has well expanded with the medium and business of cartoons. It's one of the few where a good chunk of production and artist roles are hit on. Several dozen categories dare to acknowledge parts of the job not often specified. It really is a big night for cartoons and the people who make them. I've always remembered it more so for the slate of hosts they get each year, ranging from a sliding scale to stupidly appropriate choice to, yeah. Sometimes it's not the hosts themselves that raise eyebrows, but the style, how they handle mishaps that drive their performance. I name-dropped them in the intro for a reason. Their legendary slip-ups will never be easily shaken off, partially because the circumstances behind them are steeped in irony. It's not guilty of anything extraordinary by award show standards, but you know what, you'll get it once I explain. There's two major controversies we need to disseminate, both concerning their sloppy handling of ballots during the voting process. Alright, so as for the first story, in 2008, they had a big mix-up when it came to the Best Short Subject category. The 5 shorts that were nominated were subject to an online voting pool, 2 of which were independent works, the other 3 were Disney or Pixar works. Once voting opened up on the site, these 2 independent films weren't featured there. It took them like a week to correct this mistake. They threw out the votes, and then they reopened the ballot back up. Everything's supposed to be fine. But when the ballot was opened up again, the preview for one of these independent films was not included. For each selection, they're supposed to upload the short in full, just so any member of the voting block could watch and then just vote. One of those was not properly uploaded to the site. I think part of the short was just not there. And then for the other one, it was just omitted entirely. It took a few days for them to fix this error, and by the time they did, they only had about 24 hours to cast their ballots. So a bit of a whoopsie-poopsie. Considering the end result, who won, I'm not sure if things would have been much different, but it was still pretty big mess up. Pretty surprising because the second, the more prominent controversy happened literally the year after this. There's 2 little films that were going head to head for the main category, Best Animated Feature. I don't know if you've heard of these. They're called Kung Fu Panda and Wall-E. Wall-E, I don't know if you've heard of them. They're kind of fringe favorites. Now, I don't know if you remember the air around these particular movies. I could tell you for free that Wall-E was pretty much thought to be a future sweep in progress. Everybody thought it was just going to lay waste to the award season, and there wouldn't be any bones about it. But imagine their shock when it was actually Kung Fu Panda that rose out of the ashes like a phoenix and took the Annie Award for free. Now, in current year, this probably doesn't sound that peculiar because Kung Fu Panda in the current millennium is probably one of our most praised and well-regarded and well-respected works created. But again, this was considered a bit of a ballsy move, considering the fact that Wall-E was just so damn good. And you have to wonder what type of mountains were moved in order to make this happen. Well, as it turned out, there was a teensy tiny bit of a rule that made this a bit easier for them. You see, DreamWorks was allowed to give each and every one of their employees free membership into Aifa. Basically, if you are out in the field, if you are an industry professional, you would get that membership anyway. But the way that most of these sources describe it, it makes it seem like every employee that they had, even if they weren't related to production, were given memberships. And so, you could have custodial workers voting for Kung Fu Panda just, out of favoritism. I'm not saying that happened. That's what it seems like. I mean, maybe I am saying that. So usually, right, for a lot of these award shows, Membership is typically invite only, or it's based off of merit, like the amount of work that you did and for what time, like how many credits you have. Generally, you can join ASIFA right now for a humble membership fee. I could join ASIFA right now if I wanted to. The membership fee is not that high. If you're an industry professional or a student within like the creative arts, you too can join ASIFA. And at least at the time, I'm not sure if this is still current, but at the time, this did in fact confer voting rights. So, you know, even for Wally, that is a a bit of an uphill battle. It's a bit of a climb. It was a bit of a shit show. You know, it didn't take that long for people to figure that out. Disney decided to bail us, and fuck this. They didn't submit anything for the 2010 award cycle. So ASIFA kind of half-assedly, you know, tucked their tail between their legs, and then they changed the rules so that, at least for individual achievement categories, you would have to be a bona fide professional to be able to vote. What's kind of ironic is that shortly before Disney eventually returned to the Annies, How to Train Your Dragon swept through the awards. As far as we can tell, there was nothing weird that conferred that to occur, but wouldn't blame anyone for feeling any type of way. Really wouldn't. It was such a blatant example of bias driven by money and power. In some way, it's easy to play team sports and ordain a side the most morally justified, but in the grand scheme of things, it sets a horrific precedent. Nobody ever said this show had to compete directly with the Oscars or even be on the right side of history, opposite to objectionable choices made. It was founded with the sole purpose of promoting animation professionals, and there's two Titanic studios that are duking it out for rather paltry bragging rights. Their clout, while not unearned, was built off the backs of hundreds, if not thousands, of hardworking craftspeople that are overshadowing their one night to be celebrated. It's a shameless display that IATSE was more or less complicit in. The optics were shit, and everyone could see that from a mile away. And to their credit, questionable, nothing quite as disastrous has happened again. But it's still a pretty big series of events for this humble little award show. Those in charge have made some serious missteps at points, but in the wide, increasingly desolate scope of industry animation, it's still holding down a significant number of accolades for those who are often overlooked. It is very much the little award show that could, and much of its backstory is portrayed as an uphill battle. It's more or less been on the straight and narrow for a decade, but like the field it represents, it still has a bit of ways to go. With that all in mind, I'm more than happy enough to give it its flowers in current year.
Tu sei un pazzo, va via da qui! Sono stanco di te, ti do un pugno nella testa!
So Cartoons on the Bay, I believe, is particularly obscure. I wouldn't imagine many in my audience to even be aware of them. Even just like a passing mention of the Punchinellas would be rather hard to come by at this juncture. But if I had to describe it, it's an experience. It's kind of a little bit of everything. It was founded in 1996 by Italy's main public broadcaster. In form and in structure, it's pretty close to another show we'll get to pretty soon. And it's perhaps easiest to explain by splitting it up into two different eras. Cartoons on the Bay was meant to venerate and celebrate different animation from TV, film, multi-platform arenas. It didn't have an express purpose other than that. It didn't have any specialization. So from 96 up to 2008, its express purpose was just to focus on like a few categories. You can see this very clearly laid out in what they chose to focus on for those years. I would say, in comparison to the second era, this one focused a bit more on American projects as well. So there's a few series that might pop up within the history of the show that you wouldn't expect to see there. The second era starts like 2009 and continues up to present day. It has much more of a multimedia focus to it. If you thought they focused on too much within that first era, oh boy, you're gonna lose your head. Even for an event mainly for the trades, there is a wide focus in so many forms and types and styles of animation. It's hard to keep track of it. It's probably not for the layman. You are not forming your top 20 best animated films of the year off the Punchinellas. That is not happening. You're not gonna be able to navigate your way through. Just gonna say it. Their Hall of Fame is host to numerous legendary animation professionals, some that you will know and some that you probably don't. Again, I think the amount of variety that's featured in the show itself is great. Its approach feels rather decentralized, and unless you kind of know what you want to look for, if you have like a particular focus in mind, You might not get much out of it, though undoubtedly they do spotlight a whole host of series. Mostly European, but, that's their own turf. I can't blame it for wanting to throw them some bones.
So we're on our way to Annecy, and our flight was delayed, and so now we have... How long is our layover, Bruce?
Man, I lay over like 8 hours.
It's an 8-hour layover.
This name will likely spur some familiarity, if not for the updates on new and upcoming series and movies from all parts of the industry, then for its ties to the international animation scene. Its history easily elevates the quality of the work they do. The Anse International Animation Film Festival was created in 1960. Every other year, professionals and the like would descend upon this smaller lakeside town in eastern France to vote on the rising stars of the medium. Initially starting off with only one award, they started to ramp up selections in the late 80s and early 90s. At the same time, they switched over to being an annual event. The actual festival has evolved and taken a different shape since then. In some respect, its international animation film market has picked up the slack. To us, it's not much more than another source of announcement fodder, but its function is significant to the event's ecosystem. Following in the footsteps of Cartoon Forum, MIFA helps consolidate a number of network studios, producers, and various other entities for the sake of mutual promotion and networking. It keeps a spotlight on its originating ceremony and most likely contribute to its pool of sponsors. There's 6 main categories to consider here: feature films contre champ, short films, films for TV and advertising, student films, and films made for the internet. Most of these feature 4 to 9 nominees each year, with the exception of Contre Champ, which can feature many more by virtue of being the experimental designation. A cursory glance will tell you that many of the show's winners are European, and often the awards are snagged by members of the host country. Part of this is incidental in that there's an expectation of increased awareness and higher visibility for European projects. While not as numerous within the winner circle, I would also attribute this to the slight lean in Japanese representation Anse typically holds. Compared to the United States, Europe is a hotbed for creative arts funding, with many internationally renowned films being funded by their respective governments. Generally, the average fan would benefit significantly from following Annecy's strand of nominees. By sheer volume alone, the exposure to new voices from different parts of the globe would be staggering. It's basically the silver standard the animation community begs for, but I think maximum awareness comes from the trades event, which is a good metaphor for where we're at as consumers. Seriously, that award show does deserve a look.
Sherman, let's get one thing clear. I will never submit to being addressed by that ridiculous name. You will call me Mr. Peabody.
The Peabody Awards have been my personal favorite for a while now. Everything about it feels quite equitable and holistic. It gives ideas and concepts that may be trapped behind a glass ceiling a leg up, sometimes in spite of their inherent popularity. All the way back in 1938, a committee of important figures in radio broadcasting sought to establish a way to recognize excellence in their field. Named after the donor that made the initial experiment possible, the Peabody Award was officially coined in 1940. As is in line with the nature of the accolade, the show became early adopters of other forms of media rather quickly. Television got its own category in 1940, projects facilitated on the internet sometime in the 90s. The only one that was consciously left out was the theatrical motion picture. The process for nomination is mysterious and vague. There's only one true mandate the award seeks to accept, which is to commemorate excellence in media. Several hundred entries are submitted and whittled down to a short list of a few dozen. They represent 7 categories overall. There's usually some overlap between the general entertainment categories, but that one is the most relevant to us, other than the children's category. Don't let the label fool you now. There is no one type of show that they stick to. I'm gonna rattle off the chronological list of animated series that were awarded a Peabody, and keep in mind this may omit a couple projects by virtue of not being like a full series. I just wanted to give you a sense of the range they facilitated over the last few decades. Animaniacs, The Simpsons, Dr. Katz, Arthur, Little Bill, Blue's Clues, Dora the Explorer, South Park, Classical Baby, The Boondocks, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Adventure Time, Doc McStuff and Steven Universe, Molly and Denali, Stillwater, The Owl House, and City of Ghosts. You know what? I have to make an amendment here. As it turns out, the last animated project to be awarded a Peabody was actually Bluey, so... yeah, I mean... was that enough? Was that enough notable series from across time to convince you? Was that it? Did Bluey tip the scales? Let me know in the comments, dog. To the average person, this is arguably the widest spread imaginable. In the grand scheme of things, it's still a small slice of the medium's greats, but the equity amongst those within it is unparalleled. Series of all different backgrounds, networks, and audiences that have widely disparate themes, formats, and tones between them, but all satisfy the most basic tenet of signifying excellence in the field. It's deep, but it's unpretentious. The shows are meaningful without being feckless cash cows. Well, most of them anyway. This selection could be anyone's entry point into the world of animation. Even if most of it was handpicked from one's own backyard, it is a distinction that strives for balance across all sectors. It enforces a great perspective of animation, one that could become the default with more ceremonies like it. I decided to try and wrap this up with a quote from the organization responsible for the Peabodys, because they really are that bitch. Let's not even play, dog. They really are that bitch. They were always in it to win it, but they always knew when to chill out, okay? Listen to this. Not all great programming wins a Peabody Award. The number of programs receiving an award or recognition is limited to 30 winners and 30 nominees, so that is a very high bar for the thousands of programs available to viewers. What is more, winning such recognition is the product of an intensive process, one that requires a unanimous vote arrived at through face-to-face deliberations. And as anyone who has engaged with other humans in decision-making in institutional settings can attest, a workplace, a religious group, even a family, reaching unanimity of opinion is quite difficult. Peabody jurors see an array of quality media that may not win an award or recognition in a given year. But that doesn't mean the media isn't excellent, or perhaps more importantly, that it isn't worth engaging with. Indeed, sometimes programs that don't win awards are precisely the types of stories that we should engage with as citizens and consumers, because they challenge the viewer, his or her sense of quality, of propriety, of value. If we believe, as we do at Peabody, that important media are comprised of stories that deserve contemplation, discussion, and debate, then it should also mean we should also occasionally cast a wide net for what to watch and what to listen to. So, as you can see, this is obviously the fucking take of the year. Take of the century, actually. I'm aware most of the outrage directed at the shows are focused on the fundamental facts, but there's an inherent emotional bias lingering. There's never been a moment in history where everything that deserved accolades received them. In a timeline where every show was completely fair to the medium, shit would still happen that would make you question their standing, and that's okay. Winning is kind of important, but the works that truly matter will be carried forth by the people they've molded, the ones that have shaped them, no matter where they are in life, who they represent in society, or who they are as people. Even the obscure underdogs are eligible for that race, and it's important to not lose sight of that. So this award season, I would encourage you to keep a cool head, and you know what, like, the industry guys, you know, they have free range. They have carte blanche to complain as much as they'd like. But we don't. We got the power to change some shit. I think it's time we change some shit. I'm just kind of hoping and praying that if the Oscars gets themselves into some shit again this year, that the apology is at least a little more worthy of praise than whatever the hell this is.
Very, very nicely put, and I'm going to give you that one.